Good morning and welcome to Onward in Love and Caregiving. I'm Greg Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of GJP International, which is Greg Johnson Partnerships International. And here in New York, I have the great privilege of serving as the chief advisor to the CEO of Emblem Health for family caregiving. I want to welcome you to this particular program because it's a very important topic that, truthfully, the pandemic brought stage center to each and every one of us. As many of you who have been following us since the new year know that I began the year by suggesting that we spend a bit of time going back to our roots. I'm always interested in that at least once a year, because as we go along, as we progress, we learn a great deal, we have new challenges, but going back to where it began, to what is family caregiving, gives us context for the challenges, frankly, that we're facing even as we go further along. Also, as we know, every day someone new becomes a family caregiver. And if that's you, I say welcome. And I say the two words that I say no matter where in the world I speak. I always say, if you remember nothing else, I say, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the backbone of the world's healthcare systems. And to help us understand that better, we went back and looked at family caregiving from an overall point of view. We then looked at what is family of origin, what is family of choice. We then looked at what is caregiving, its many faces. It's not just seniors like me, but there were multiple faces. And it's important for us to know those when we're dealing with people so that we respect and we honor the many roles that people are often playing. It's not often just one care recipient, but it can be many different ones. And often we just don't see it. That's true of disabilities and of so many things in life. And we need to take time to look at it. Then we spent a time, 3 weeks actually, looking at who you are and who I am. We are physical, emotional, and spiritual human beings. And so are our care recipients. And so we looked at the physical. We looked at things that we need to do in a practical sense. And it relates very much to the topic we're going to talk about today. Then we talked about the emotional and the mental aspects. We talked last week about the spiritual aspects, the spiritual components of family caregiving. And truthfully, what I have been doing in these, what will be 8 weeks, is recreating something that I taped long ago. In our YouTube channel, Family Caregiving with the Rev, you see something called Yana. You are not alone. And it's 8 videos, each 8 to 10 minutes in length, and dealing with literally each and every one of these topics. Now, I did that 10, 15 years ago, so it's been a long time. I've done variations on it since, but I've never done it as I'm doing it here, where I'm devoting a program to each of them. And our wonderful administrative person, Casey, will be putting that together as a group so that you can have that as a group as you're doing research or want to rehear something, or you want to review something, or you're working with another caregiver, or you're a social worker, or you're a nurse, or you're someone who is helping a family member. These are tools that you can share with them. Obviously, they're free. They are on our YouTube channel, and all you need to do is go to www.youtube.com and enter Family Caregiving with the Rev, and you'll see my picture pop up, and that will lead you directly to all of the many talks and series that we have been doing, including many of the wonderful conversations that I have had the privilege of doing with Emblem Health. Those are called Talks with Greg. We also have the daily or the weekly tips for family caregivers, which was a series we did for Emblem. Emblem has been such a leader in this field, and I have been the blessed person who has done the practical. Mine has not been the research, mine has not been the data work. Ours has been saying to someone, welcome, let's walk together. What are the practical things we can do? And as such, when I taped the original You Are Not Alone series, that was a big accomplishment for me because it was the first time I had done a taping since the strokes that I had had. So it goes back many years. And I was quite frankly concerned, would I be able to do it? Well, the truth is, I did all 8 of them in one very long afternoon. And the venue for it was one of the libraries over at the Marble Collegiate Church, where I've had the privilege of serving for many years prior to my retirement. Um, and it was great fun. And I had thought I was doing 7 programs. And so I brought costumes and what have you, so it would look like we didn't do them all in one day, even though that was the truth. But as I was doing it, I realized that there was an 8th topic that needed to come before the final segment. And that is the topic that I am going to deal with you today. And that topic is death, dying, and grief. Now, here in America, sadly, those are topics we don't like to talk about. They're things that we have tons of euphemisms for. People have a terrible time saying, he died, she died. They pass away, they're gone. No, they died. And it's something that's going to happen to you and is going to happen to me. None of us gets out of here alive. At least I haven't met anyone yet. One person, and I trust what that person had to say. But I want us to have a little time to look at the topic of death, dying, and grief, because I want you to understand, and you know this from what we have all been through. During the pandemic, during that horrible crisis that we went through worldwide, we had to talk about death and dying. And it's very interesting to me. During the pandemic time, I keep certain records here. They're confidential, of course, but I did well over 850 one-on-one conversations with Emblem employees, past employees, members of the church, members with prayer circle, members within my building here, people in many, many parts of the world. And interestingly, the notes that I've kept, I've gone back and added them and done a bit of my simplistic data research. And it's interesting, about 46% of the over 850 one-on-ones, and that meant only one call. Many of those calls ended up with many, many more conversations. But I just kept wanting to know how many people were calling and what the topics were. Well, over 46% were on death, dying, and grief. I was grateful, and I am always grateful, and I want you to know that, for each and every person who honors me by telephoning and sharing such deep and personal issues. I respect that greatly, and I feel honored that you would share that with me, and I keep that all within my heart and in my prayers for you. It is important, family caregivers, that we understand that death, dying, and grief are very much part of the caregiving journey. And I want to share just some thoughts with you on that, because each of us deals with it differently. Each of us may come from a very different theological background. Some may not have any theological background. It's much more of a secular background. But dealing with death and dealing with dying, remember, the only person that you're going to spend your whole life with is you. And what does life, what are the components of life? We come into the world, we are born, and we go out of the world. We take a breath, and we release that breath at the end. What do we say often when someone has died? He breathed or she breathed her last. Now, one of the religious words that I like to share with people when we're talking about death and dying, no matter what your background, what your faith tradition might be. In the Hebrew scriptures, the name of God was YHWH. Vowels were added later, and it is often pronounced Yahweh, but it's YHWH. I have always loved the thought, and it was told to me by a very precious rabbi friend of mine, someone with whom I worked when I sang at a temple out in Brooklyn many, many years ago. And I've heard it since from other clergy. But the gift of life and the gift of death begins and ends with breath. You remember Moses, the story of Moses, when he got the 10 Commandments. He said, I've got to tell these people who you are. What is your name? And Yahweh was the name. I am that I am. Consider this, the great gift of the divine, by whatever name you may choose, Yahweh. Yes, Yahweh, the breath of life, the gift of life. And therefore, each and every one of us, in birth and in death, honors the name Yahweh. Think about that. It's something that has always blessed me. And whenever I'm panicking, whenever I'm distressed, the simple breathing, and I go within. We can remember last week's talk. I go within to the divine breath and spirit of the universe, of God, of the divine, whatever words help you to express the great mysteries can be of great help to you. Now, there is one word that I like to suggest to people, and remember, these are only suggestions that I'm making to you. But first of all, I am saying that death, dying, and grief deserve as much love and attention for you as you gave to your care recipient. It is enormously and immensely important that once a caregiving journey concludes physically, when your loved one, your friend has died, you need to take time. You need to take time to deal with that and not jump into yet another caregiving situation. Too often we can get serial caregivers, and that leads very much to codependency. No, your loved one has died. Their life here on earth is over. They have gone on to eternity. But you remain, and you need to take time to deal with it. Now, many, many people will use the phrase, oh, I need closure. Now, I'm going to tell you that is a word I do not use. That relationship was too meaningful to close it, to end it, to forget it, a finality to it. No. Grief remains. It doesn't end. Grief changes as we change. listen to a poem that I read the other day, and I thought I want to share this in this portion on ways of dealing with death. You can shed tears because they are gone, or you can smile because they lived. You can close your eyes and pray they will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that they left for you. Your heart can be empty because you can't see them, or you can be full of the love you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember only that they are gone, or you can cherish their memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind and feel empty, or you can do what they would want. Smile, open your heart, love, and go on. Now, later in our conversation, I'm going to share a little bit of my own story. But for me, the greatest gift in the world of grief has once again come to me from my own 30-plus year journey in the 12-step work in AA. And that I have always found to be the great pathway in grief is surrender and gratitude. That doesn't come immediately. We need to go through the tears. We need to go through all the stages of grief. Wonderful, wonderful book that you all know. All the stages of grief. But ultimately, we surrender. We surrender their life. We surrender our love. We let go gently. And we receive abundantly. And then the life can be for blessing with gratitude. It's not a simple fix. It isn't meant to be. As Queen Elizabeth said, grief is the price we pay for love. And how blessed we have been. Whatever structure that love may be. And love never ends. Now, caregivers, I want to give you a sample, perhaps a physical picture. It's very interesting. Yesterday, on News Channel 1 here in New York City, they did a piece on the labyrinth, which we have at the Marble Collegiate Church. The labyrinth is a meditative circle copied from the original one in Chartres in France. And it was a wonderful piece that they did because the labyrinth is a wonderful reflective tool. Now, my late, very dear friend, Gail Sheehy, the author of Passages and so many books on passages, when her husband was dying, Clay Falker, Gail and I spent a great deal of time together, and it ended up leading, and it didn't surprise me, to her wonderful book, Passages and Caregiving. But the first time Gail and I talked, I remember saying to her, Gail, I have always found the labyrinth to be a very powerful symbol of family caregiving. Because what is it? We walk into the labyrinth and we go this way, and then something happens and it gets changed around, and we go this way. And then we think, yes, we've got it. There's a remission. We're doing it. And that happens again and again. And of course, one of the difficulties of that one is we tend to think we can play God. That's not what it's about. It's about helping us to understand that we tried this. We tried that. This medication this type of exercise, this doctor, this therapy. But ultimately, we get to the center of the labyrinth. We've walked with our loved one. We've walked with them home, as Ram Dass so beautifully said. We walk each other home. And that's what caregivers you have done and I have done. And when we get to the center, we surrender. For our loved one's physical body is no more. As I always say, this Cadillac's falling apart. This one seems to be doing quite a bit of it lately. But the body is gone and the spirit has returned. We give thanks for their life. We look back, we remember, and then we surrender. But we do not stay in the center of the labyrinth. It is our journey, again, to slowly walk out through all the stages of grief, denial, anger, frustration, until finally we exit the labyrinth in total surrender and deep gratitude. If you've never walked the labyrinth, if there's one in your area, the Marble Collegiate Church has one, and you can phone there and find out what the hours are. It's a powerful, private opportunity for you to walk through, to grow through the going through. You know, that's one of my favorite phrases. We grow through the grief, and that becomes a growth opportunity for us, in which we learn many things that we will someday pass on to our caregivers. Because what we've learned, we're going to pass on. That's what it's about. Others will stand on our shoulders. Now, one of the great books, and I want you to know I love to share books. When my late husband, Joe, died, and that's now 12 years ago, Joe and I had been together for 41 years. I asked a very, very dear friend, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Cawthorn Crafton, to speak at his memorial service. And Barbara gave what was one of the most beautiful, powerful meditations I've ever heard. It was entitled The Two Baskets. And I'm not going to attempt to do that. You can go on YouTube and hear Barbara do that herself. But in essence, it's we are all locked right now in a basket. Oh, and it's beautiful. I'm looking out at New York City right now up to Central Park. This is home, and I love it so. And yet, certainly dealing with what I've been going through with the hip and its very slow progress, I'm getting older. Pieces of me are beginning to fall apart and not heal so quickly. As I say, this old Cadillac's fallen apart. And I'm in this wonderful basket. But baskets have a way of coming apart too. And as that happens, we get to see between the basket occasionally just a little bit. We say, that looks familiar. But I don't spend much time doing that because I'm so happy being right here. And I'm so grateful for Donnie. I love it. But I know there's a greater basket. A basket from which I came originally. And where when this basket of mine completely disintegrates, I will simply step back home. And therefore, Barbara, as she gave this wonderful meditation, I went to her after. I said, Barbara, I hear a book. Well, I was right. The book is entitled The Also Life by Barbara Cawthorne Craft. I cannot recommend this enough to people who are experiencing grief, who are experiencing the death of a loved one, or who have experienced the recent death of a loved one. Barbara Cawthorne Crafton, The Also Life, and there are a number of chapters. There are 10 chapters altogether. 10th chapter, The Two Baskets. Read it and be blessed. Now, as I promised, I wanted to take just a moment to share my own journey and a story that has meant more to me in my life. It's one I've shared with many, many of the people who called me and with whom I had the privilege of counseling during particularly this pandemic time. Because so many of the deaths occurred where people could not be together. Touch was not possible. As I've said to you, my husband died 12 years ago. But Joe and I had adopted a young boy, and he was in our lives for 20 years. We adopted him when he was 20 in Bali, and he died at 40 very quickly of bone cancer. And Putra died about 3 years before Joe. I've always felt he went ahead to prepare for him, and quite frankly, just feet away from where I'm sitting is where Joe died in my arms 12 years ago. And I know Putra was there to take him home. One of my customs when I'm in Bali, our home has been for many years right on the Indian Ocean. And I love to go down to the ocean very, very early in the morning, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock. It's still dark. The morning star is there. It's the end of the stars at night, and we can see the stars in Bali. I don't do too well seeing them here in Manhattan. But I look at those stars and feel the eternity and the immenseness. Bali is the morning of the world. It's where the new day begins. And so I love to greet it with gratitude and with love. And then it gets very, very dark before the dawn. And then slowly the magnificent sunrise and the new day. This was about 2 years after Putra's death and before Joe's death. And I was down there one morning and I was feeling particularly sad. I was very tearful when all of a sudden, and I use this time to read meditations, I use this time for prayer, I use it for, my spirit will tell me what I really need. Maybe sometimes I just sit and sing hymns. But that particular morning, something happened, and it's never happened since, which is why I know it was a gift from the divine and from my beloved Putra. I was sitting here looking out, and it was at that point where it became extremely dark, except out of my right eye, I saw a ship leaving the harbor, and it was festooned with lights. They'd obviously had a fabulous party the night before they embarked out into Nusa Tenggara, out onto Flores, and out to the beautiful islands in eastern Indonesia. And as I prayed, I watched the boat, not paying a lot of attention at first. But then I realized I'd never seen it before. And I've learned, and I hope you have, to accept gifts of the nature, of experience. When something happens that's quite unique, do you take time to know that it's a message, that it's a comfort, that it's something I needed to know at that moment? And so I paid a bit more attention to the boat as it sailed, and I prayed a prayer that I'm going to end this broadcast with, actually. And the boat kept going further and further and further away. And I suddenly said, Putra's on that boat, sending me love. Now, physically he wasn't, but spiritually he was. And then the boat, it disappeared. But it wasn't gone. It was on to another port, to a vision that I can't presently see, but that one day I will join. And I sat and cried, very much as I feel like right now. I felt blessed, and I knew that Putra had gone ahead. I've often been deeply touched by, there's a photo that you see often on Facebook, and it shows someone who is dying, lying in a hospital bed or a bed at home, and they're surrounded by people who are grieving, are weeping, trying to hold on to them. But at the same time, we see the spirit body rising up. And what do we see at the top of the picture? A reunion of love and joy. And that is waiting for each of us. We're not alone. We come into life. We leave this life. We come in as spirit, and we go forward as spirit. We're locked in time and space down here, but that doesn't exist beyond. And so I encourage you not to be afraid of the topic, not to be frightened of it, but to slowly, lovingly surrender and find gratitude. Because at that point, you will be able to move forward. And for you, my beloved family caregivers, I know what you will do. You've learned from your caregiving journey, but you've taken time to honor that journey and honor yourself for what you have done. And next week, in our closing episode of the 8th series of You Are Not Alone, I'm going to be talking about the gifts of family caregiving. And I look forward to you being with us. But in the meantime, I want to share with you, as I close this broadcast, a prayer that I have loved so deeply, and I have prayed it with many hundreds of people at various stages in the journey of life. Please join me. O Lord, support us all the day long, until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then in thy mercy grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest, and peace at the last. Through Christ. Amen and amen. Thank you for being with me this morning. Thank you for this time together. It's my prayer that it will help you in whatever stage you are in family caregiving, and that you may use some of this to help yourself and to help others in the topics we need to talk of and embrace: death, dying, and grief, as we journey into surrender and gratitude. Thank you for being with me. And as we always say, onward in love and caregiving. Namaste. God bless and I'll see you next week. Onward in love and caregiving.